The year was 1847, and in the sun-baked town of Cedar Ridge, Texas, something unimaginable was unfolding on the steps of the courthouse. Beneath the punishing midday heat, 5 young women stood in torn, dusty dresses, their eyes hollow, as the men below barked out bids as if they were livestock. 4 of the girls, sisters, had already been sold off to settle their father's mountain of gambling debts. Only one remained. 16-year-old Sarah May, her green eyes blazing with defiance as the auctioneer raised his gavel for the final time. That's when a solitary figure emerged from the crowd. His face, aged by sorrow and sun, held a quiet strength. And then he spoke words that no one expected. "I'll take her as my wife, not as my property." The day had begun like any other in Cedar Ridge. The sun climbed over the mesa, casting long shadows across the main street. But by noon, the entire town had converged on the courthouse, pulled by rumors that spread faster than fire across the parched land. Old Man McKinnon, infamous for his misfortune at cards, had finally lost everything. Sheriff Tom Bradley was overseeing the seizure and auction of all McKinnon's remaining possessions, including his daughters. Sarah May, the youngest and fiercest of the 5, stood at the end of the line, watching her world crumble. Her sisters were taken one after another. Elizabeth, the eldest at 22, had gone to a rancher from the next county for $50. Mary Catherine, just 19 and gentle as a dove, was claimed by a shopkeeper who viewed her as little more than inventory. Then came the twins, Hannah and Rebecca, 18 and identical in looks and sorrow. They were bought together by a saloon owner known for his rough hands and rougher reputation. Now only Sarah remained. Her auburn hair gleamed in the harsh sun, and though her dress was ragged and patched, she stood with her head held high, her pride unbroken. "Now then, folks," came the voice of Pete Hawkins, the auctioneer, a wiry man with a nasal twang. His voice rang out over the hushed crowd. Last of the McKinnon girls, Sarah May, 16 years old. Healthy, hardworking, knows how to cook, clean, and garden better than most women twice her age. The townsfolk shifted uncomfortably. Sarah's cheeks burned, but she kept her eyes fixed on the horizon. Beyond the town, beyond the pain. She had tried to run once when she was just 14. The desert nearly killed her. Her father had found her nearly lifeless, curled beside a dry creek bed. "Do I hear $20? Hawkins called, his gavel poised. "20, came Jake Morrison's voice, a single man who ran a small ranch just outside town, known for a bad temper and a love for liquor. "25, came another shout from deeper in the crowd. Sarah shut her eyes, trying to imagine herself somewhere else. Perhaps in the cabin where she had once lived with her mother before fever took her. Before the cards and whiskey stole her father's soul. Before everything collapsed. The bidding continued, a dreadful rhythm rising. 30, 35. Each offer another weight she could not shrug off. Her eyes opened and swept across the gathering, desperate for any sign of compassion. But the townspeople averted their gaze. The women clutched shawls tighter and whispered behind cupped hands. The men stared at the ground, their expressions neutral, like this was just another Saturday trade. And then she saw him, standing off to the side by the hitching post where a sleek black stallion waited, was a man she'd seen before in town, but never spoken to. Broad-shouldered and tall, with dark hair tinged silver at the temples and eyes creased with stories. His clothes were simple, clean but worn. Black vest, white shirt, trousers dusted by the road. She knew his name, Daniel O'Brien. A widower, they said, who'd buried both wife and infant son the winter before, lost to cholera. 40, shouted Morton Clay, a wealthy landowner known for a cruel streak. 45, barked Jake Morrison again, face flushed with drink and stubbornness. And then, cutting through the rising chaos, came Daniel O'Brien's voice. 100. Silence fell like a curtain. Hawkins blinked in disbelief, his gavel frozen mid-air. "Did you say 100, Mr. O'Brien?" he asked, uncertain. "I did," Daniel said, stepping forward. His eyes met Sarah's, not appraising, not possessive, just steady. "But not for what you think." The crowd turned to watch as he moved closer to the steps, each step sure and calm. "I offer $100, he said again, louder this time. "And my name." Gasps rippled through the onlookers. "Sarah May McKinnon," he continued. "If you'll have it, I'd be honored if you'd become my wife. Not my servant. Not my property. My equal." The murmurs turned into open chatter. This wasn't how these things worked. This wasn't how anything worked. Sarah stared at him. This man, a stranger really, was offering something she'd almost forgotten she could have. A choice. Her voice trembled as she found the words. "I don't even know you, Mr. O'Brien." Daniel smiled gently, a sadness behind it. "No, Miss McKinnon, you don't. But I've seen you. Around town. I've watched how you care for your sisters. How you carry yourself even when the world turns against you. I saw you help old Pete carry groceries, and how you sat with Mrs. Henderson when she was sick, asking for nothing in return." He took off his hat and ran a hand through his hair. "I'm not asking you to love me, not today. I'm asking you to let me give you a life where you're treated as someone worthy. Where you can be safe. Where we can figure the rest out together." Sarah glanced at the crowd, at the faces that had looked away while her family was broken apart. Then back at the man who stood before her, asking not for ownership, but for partnership. "Will you," she said softly, "treat me as an equal, Mr. O'Brien? Not as something bought." "As surely as I breathe," he answered, his voice solemn. "As God is my witness." Dust swirled at her feet, and the wind carried the scent of change. She took a breath, then nodded. "Yes, Mr. O'Brien, I'll take your name, and I'll do my best to honor it." Voices buzzed all around. Some disapproved. Others nodded quietly. Pete Hawkins looked out at the crowd, then back at them, gavel still raised. "Well," he muttered, "this sure ain't by the book. But if the lady consents, and the offer stands." And with a sharp rap of the gavel, the future shifted. The gavel fell with a sharp crack. "Sold to Mr. Daniel O'Brien," the auctioneer announced. But Daniel was already walking up the courthouse steps, not toward a purchase, but toward a woman. He reached out his hand to Sarah May, not as a man claiming property, but as an equal offering partnership. She placed her hand in his, her small fingers swallowed by his rough, calloused palm, and in that simple gesture, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. A flicker of hope. "Reverend Miller," Daniel called out to an older man standing among the crowd. "Would you marry us now, right here?" He spoke with a quiet urgency. "I want there to be no doubt about Mrs. O'Brien's standing in this town." The Reverend, a gentle-eyed man with a beard as white as snow, stepped forward without hesitation. "It would be my honor, Daniel," he said warmly. "And I must say, this is the finest thing I've seen in Cedar Ridge in a long time." And so, on the very courthouse steps where Sarah May had nearly been sold like cattle, she instead became a bride. The ceremony was brief and simple, watched by half the townspeople. There was no kiss, only a solemn handshake. But as Reverend Miller declared them husband and wife, Sarah May felt something shift within her, a stirring deep in her chest. A quiet sense of something she thought long lost, the possibility of happiness. Daniel helped her onto his horse, his touch gentle. "My place is about 3 miles from here," he said over his shoulder as they rode away from the gawking crowd. "It's nothing fancy, but it's clean and strong. You'll have your own room, unless you decide different." Sarah May held on to him, her arms wrapped around his waist. She was surprised by how solid he felt, how warm. For the first time in months, she felt secure. The wind tugged at her hair, the prairie stretching wide on either side of them, and despite the turmoil of the morning, she found herself smiling. Daniel's ranch was just as he had described. Plain but well cared for. The house was small, its porch shaded, its windows full of light. A tidy garden stretched behind it, with rows of vegetables and herbs that hinted at patience and attention. A modest barn housed a few horses and a cow. "It's beautiful," Sarah May said as he helped her dismount. And she meant it. After so much chaos and humiliation, this place felt like a haven. He showed her around inside. The kitchen was warm with a cast-iron stove. The sitting room centered around a stone hearth. 2 bedrooms lay at the back of the house. Daniel hesitated at the door to the smaller one. "This was going to be the nursery," he said quietly, hand resting on the doorknob. "For my son. But it's yours now. For as long as you want it." Sarah May heard the grief beneath his steady tone. "What was his name?" she asked gently. "James," he answered. "James Patrick O'Brien. He lived 3 days." They stood in silence for a while, bound by different kinds of sorrow. Then Daniel cleared his throat and continued the tour. That evening, they sat together on the porch, the sun sinking low over the plains, painting the sky in hues of orange and soft red. Sarah May had changed into one of the simple cotton dresses Daniel had brought. With her permission, he'd selected one that fit her well enough. Compared to the tattered dress she'd worn for weeks, the clean fabric felt like silk. "Tell me about your wife," she said softly as twilight deepened. Daniel was quiet so long she wondered if he'd ignore the question. But finally he spoke, his voice hushed by memory. "Her name was Catherine. We met at a church picnic in San Antonio. I knew the moment I saw her. She had this light about her. The sweetest laugh you ever heard." He paused, his hands still. "We had 5 good years together. Then cholera came through. She fought it hard, for the baby's sake. But, I'm sorry," Sarah May said, and she truly was. "It must be hard having me here, in her house." Daniel turned to her, his gray eyes steady in the dim light. "Catherine would have liked you. She'd be glad this house is sheltering someone who needs it. She always wanted it to be full of life again." In the weeks that followed, they settled into a rhythm that felt oddly natural. Sarah May took over the household duties, cooking, cleaning, and keeping the garden in order. Daniel worked the land and made occasional trips into town. They were courteous and thoughtful, careful not to overstep each other's space, like 2 people slowly learning to trust again. Despite what the auctioneer had claimed, Sarah May proved to be even more than he promised. Her cooking turned their meals into small celebrations, so good that Daniel would sometimes close his eyes in appreciation after the first bite. She had a way with animals too, gentle, patient. And under her care, the house began to feel less like a monument to grief and more like a home. Something unspoken grew between them, fragile but real. A new beginning, forged not from romance, but from kindness, loss, and shared resilience. With gentle care, she coaxed milk from the cows and gathered eggs from the chickens. The garden, too, thrived beneath her patient hands. She even nursed a sick foal back to health. Yet it was more than just her skill that brought new life to the ranch. It was her presence, her quiet spirit. She hummed as she worked, sang lullabies to the animals, and slowly began to smile more often. Daniel found himself eager to return home each evening, to sit beside her on the porch and hear about her day. "I saw a roadrunner this morning," she said one evening, her eyes glowing with excitement. It was chasing a lizard through the garden, and when it caught it, it held it up like it was showing off. "I laughed so hard I nearly dropped the laundry basket." Daniel smiled, picturing the scene. "They're proud little things. Catherine used to say they were like desert jesters." It was the first time he'd spoken his late wife's name without pain shadowing his face. Sarah May noticed, understanding now that healing, like trust, unfolded slowly, step by step. About a month after their unconventional wedding, Daniel returned one afternoon to find Sarah May sitting on the porch steps, tears running freely down her face. A crumpled letter rested in her lap. "What's happened?" he asked, instantly at her side. She held the letter out with trembling hands. "It's from Elizabeth, my sister. She managed to get word to me through the preacher in her town." Daniel waited quietly as she wiped her face and steadied her voice. "She says Mary Catherine tried to escape from the merchant who bought her. He caught her and..." Her voice cracked. "He beat her so badly she can hardly walk. And the twins, the saloon owner is making them do things no woman should be forced into." Daniel's jaw clenched with fury. "Where are they?" "All of them. Elizabeth is safe. The rancher who bought her is kind. He's even asked to marry her properly. But the others. She looked at him, desperation in her eyes. I have to help them. They're my sisters. Daniel stood, the decision already settled in his mind. Then we'll help them, all of them. She stared at him, surprised. You mean it? Even though it's dangerous? Even though they're not your blood? He reached down, pulling her to her feet. You're my wife. That makes them my family too. We'll figure out a way to get them out, if they want to come. The next morning, Daniel saddled 2 horses and packed provisions for the journey. Sarah May had never ridden on her own before, so he spent an hour teaching her the basics. His patience never wavered as she learned to guide the gentle mare he'd chosen for her. Marry Catherine first, he said, studying the rough map he'd sketched from Elizabeth's letter. She's in the most danger. The ride to Millerville took 2 days. From horseback, the world looked different, vast and unfamiliar. Sarah May had never traveled far from Cedar Ridge, and now the Texas landscape stretched before her like a sea of grass and sky. They shared stories as they rode, pieces of their pasts and dreams of the future. She learned that Daniel had come to Texas from Missouri after his parents died, searching for open spaces and a new beginning. He learned that she had taught herself to read using her mother's Bible and a handful of old books. She dreamed of seeing the ocean one day. They say it stretches farther than you can see, she said as they set up camp the first night. Bigger than all the prairie, and blue as the deepest sky. Maybe we'll see it together someday, Daniel said softly, and her heart leapt at how naturally he included her in his plans. They found Mary Catherine in a boarding room above the general store, sweeping the porch with cautious, painful movements. When she looked up and saw Sarah May, she dropped the broom and nearly collapsed. Is it really you? Her voice was a faint whisper. Bruises covered her face and arms. We've come to take you home, Sarah May said, jumping down from her horse and embracing her gently. A thin man with cruel eyes stepped out of the store. What's all this? That girl belongs to me. I've got papers. Daniel stepped forward, something in his stance making the man hesitate. I'll buy out her contract. Name your price. She's not for sale, the man, Prescott, replied, though his voice trembled. I've got uses for her. Daniel's eyes flicked to Mary Catherine's bruises. I can see that. But the question is, do you want to be paid? Or do you want to explain to the sheriff why she looks like that? A short, tense negotiation followed. Faced with Daniel's quiet resolve and the small crowd gathering nearby, Prescott agreed to let her go for $30 more than he'd paid, less than he might have asked under other circumstances. Mary Catherine wept as they helped her mount Daniel's horse. I thought I'd never see any of you again. I thought I was going to die there. The rescue of the twins in Dusty Creek was even more perilous. The saloon was rough, the kind of place good folks avoided. Its owner, Snake Morrison, was known for his temper and violent tendencies. Daniel spent a day watching the place, studying the movements, noting routines. The twins, Hannah and Rebecca, were kept upstairs during the day and brought down only in the evenings, when the saloon filled with rowdy cowboys and drifters. We can't just walk in and demand they be released, Daniel told the sisters back at the town's only decent hotel. Morrison's got too many men. He wouldn't hesitate to use force. Then how do we get them out? Sarah May asked, frustrated and helpless. Daniel was quiet, thinking. Then, slowly, a small smile touched his lips. We'll need the law on our side and perfect timing. They knew that every Tuesday morning, Morrison left the saloon to go to the bank and check on his other businesses. He always took his 2 best gunmen with him, leaving only a skeleton crew behind. It was their best chance. The plan was daring, and it would take every bit of courage and cunning they had. But for Sarah May, for her sisters, for the life they were slowly building together, Daniel was ready to risk it all. The bartender and a couple of hungover patrons were dozing off after the chaos of the previous night when Mary Catherine, despite her injuries, insisted on helping. They're my sisters too, she said firmly as Sarah May tried to stop her. I won't sit safely in a hotel while they're still in danger. On Tuesday morning, while Morrison was busy at the bank, Mary Catherine created a distraction outside the saloon by collapsing theatrically in the street. As the bartender and several concerned patrons rushed to her aid, Sarah May and Daniel slipped quietly in through the back and crept upstairs. At the end of a grimy hallway, they found Hannah and Rebecca locked in a cramped, filthy room. The girls looked gaunt and haunted, their faces etched with fear. When they saw Sarah May, they rushed into her embrace, tears flowing freely, overwhelmed with both relief and disbelief. "Quick, we have to move," Daniel urged, helping the weakened twins to their feet. They managed to escape the building and reach their horses without raising alarm. Just as they were about to ride out of Dusty Creek, angry shouts rang out behind them. Morrison had returned earlier than expected. "Go!" Daniel shouted, and they galloped into the open prairie, Morrison and his men close behind. The pursuit stretched over several miles. Daniel's horse held its speed, but the others were burdened with 2 riders each, and Mary Catherine was still recovering from her injuries. Their lead was shrinking. Then, just when capture seemed inevitable, a patrol from Fort Davis appeared on the horizon. The soldiers, led by a young lieutenant named Collins, quickly assessed the situation and placed themselves between the fleeing group and their pursuers. "This is a matter for the United States Army now," Lieutenant Collins told Morrison. "These people are under our protection." Morrison protested furiously, claiming the girls were his property, but when pressed for legal proof, all he had were dubious gambling debts and unofficial bills of sale, none of which could withstand scrutiny. Outmatched and without any legal grounds, Morrison and his men were forced to retreat. The soldiers escorted Daniel and the others to the nearest town, giving them a chance to rest and recover before continuing their journey. The ride back to Cedar Ridge took longer than expected. They moved slowly to allow Mary Catherine and the twins time to regain their strength. Gradually, the girls began to heal. Hannah, the more outgoing of the two, filled the days with cheerful chatter, while Rebecca, quieter by nature, slowly began to show signs of renewed spirit. Daniel was patient throughout. He helped cook, stood guard at night, and never once complained about the extra burdens. He made no mention of the additional costs or the delays. One evening, as they gathered around the fire, Rebecca looked at him curiously. "Why are you doing all this?" she asked. "We're not really your family. You barely even knew Sarah May when you married her." Daniel glanced toward Sarah May, who was tending to Mary Catherine's hand. "Family isn't always about blood," he said quietly. "It's about the choices we make. Your sister trusted me with her life. I chose to honor that trust. That makes all of you my family too." Sarah May felt a tightness in her chest, a deep and unfamiliar emotion rising. This man, who had never asked for more than simple respect, had risked his life and given everything he had to save her sisters. He had given them all a future. When they finally returned to Daniel's ranch, it felt like truly coming home. What had once been a large house for 2 now buzzed with the presence of 5, but they adjusted quickly. The twins shared a room with Sarah May, and Mary Catherine took over the spare room Daniel had used for storage. Everyone pitched in with daily chores, and soon the ranch was running smoother than ever. A month later, Elizabeth returned for a visit, brought by her kind-hearted husband, the rancher who had purchased her. The reunion of all 5 sisters was filled with joyful tears and laughter. Elizabeth took Daniel's hand in both of hers. "I can't believe you got them all out," she said sincerely. "I don't know how we can ever repay you." "Just be happy," Daniel replied. "That's more than enough." As autumn faded into winter, a new rhythm settled over the household. Hannah discovered a natural gift with the horses. Rebecca took to sewing and mending with surprising skill. Mary Catherine, now fully healed, took over most of the cooking, nurturing the household like a mother hen. The ranch was filled with laughter and warmth, the very life Catherine O'Brien had once dreamed of. But the most meaningful changes were the quiet ones between Daniel and Sarah May. They had grown close in a way that went beyond obligation. She found herself looking forward to his return each evening, and he lingered in conversation longer than necessary, reluctant to end the day. One evening in late December, as they sat together on the porch watching the season's first snowfall, Sarah May turned to him, her voice soft. "Daniel, there's something I need to say." He looked at her, his gray eyes steady in the flickering lamplight. "What is it, Sarah May?" Her heart raced. "I've come to care for you more than I expected. This started as a business arrangement, something practical, for both of us. But somewhere along the way it became something more. At least for me." Daniel was silent for a long moment, and just as she began to fear she'd said too much, he reached for her hand. "It became something more for me too," he said gently. And in that quiet, snow-dusted evening, something new began. Something that felt like love. He had crossed a line, misread her heart, assumed feelings she hadn't offered. But then he reached for her hand, his thumb gently tracing circles on her palm. "Sarah May," he said, his voice thick with feeling. "I started caring about you the moment I saw you standing on those courthouse steps. So brave, so unyielding despite everything you were going through. Since that day, what I felt only deepened. I never wanted to pressure you or make you feel like you had to return feelings that weren't truly yours." Turning on the porch swing to fully face him, Sarah May looked into his eyes. A smile spread across Daniel's face, softening the lines carved by years of grief and hard work. "I'd very much like to kiss my wife," he said, voice low and earnest. "If she's open to it." She was more than just willing. When their lips met, it was tender and full of newness. A love still young but built on respect and genuine care. It wasn't just a kiss of passion, but one that marked the beginning of something deep and lasting. The wedding ring Daniel had slipped on her finger during their quick courthouse marriage had been plain, a modest gold band. But that evening, he brought her something else. An heirloom ring that had belonged to his grandmother. A delicate emerald surrounded by small diamonds. "I want you to wear this," he said, sliding it beside her wedding band. "Not because you're replacing Catherine, she'll always have her place, but because you've made your own, a place that belongs only to you." Sarah May gazed at the ring, then at the man who had become her husband not just in name, but in every way that mattered. "I love you, Daniel O'Brien," she said, the words no longer hesitant but full of clarity. "And I love you, Sarah May O'Brien," he replied, drawing her into his arms. "More than I ever believed I could love again." Spring ushered in fresh beginnings on the O'Brien ranch. Mary Catherine announced her engagement to Dr. Marcus Webb, the gentle physician who had cared for her and fallen in love with her spirit. Hannah and Rebecca, now healed, began courtships with two brothers from a neighboring ranch, good-hearted men who treated them with admiration and kindness. But the most life-altering change came later that spring, when Sarah May confirmed what she'd quietly suspected. She was expecting Daniel's child. The news brought joy tempered with nervousness, as both remembered the sorrow of Daniel's first son's passing. Yet Dr. Webb reassured them. Sarah May was healthy and strong, and all precautions would be taken to ensure a safe birth. "This baby will be surrounded by love," Sarah May whispered one evening as she and Daniel sat together on their porch, her hand resting on her still flat stomach. "Born into a family that chose each other, that stood together." Daniel placed his hand over hers, overwhelmed by the miracle growing beneath their fingers. "Catherine would have loved this," he murmured. "She would have loved seeing this house filled with life and laughter." "Tell me about her again," Sarah said gently, as she often did. She had never felt threatened by Daniel's past. She understood love could stretch, could make room. Honoring what came before didn't take away from what existed now. Daniel's eyes grew thoughtful. "She used to say love wasn't like a pie. Giving some away didn't mean there was less for everyone else. She said love was a flame. The more you share, the brighter it shines." With summer came celebrations. Mary Catherine's wedding took place in the garden behind the house, with Reverend Miller officiating and the entire town of Cedar Ridge in attendance. A month later, Hannah and Rebecca married the Morrison brothers, no relation to the bitter man who had once bid on Sarah May. Sarah, now visibly pregnant, served as matron of honor for both weddings, her happiness lighting up her face. The frightened, resolute girl who once stood on courthouse steps had grown into a confident woman surrounded by love. Elizabeth and her husband moved their ranch closer to Cedar Ridge so the sisters could remain near each other. The O'Brien Ranch blossomed into the heart of a growing network of family and friends. In late October, as leaves turned gold and the air grew crisp, Sarah May went into labor. The delivery was long and hard, but with Daniel at her side and Dr. Webb guiding the way, she gave birth to a healthy baby boy, with Daniel's gray eyes and her strong-willed chin. They named him James Patrick O'Brien, honoring Daniel's first son while embracing the promise of a new chapter. Tears streamed down Daniel's face as he held the child for the first time. "He's perfect," he whispered, voice trembling with awe. Sarah May, exhausted but glowing, reached up to cup his face. "We all are," she said softly. "Together." And as she looked around the room, at her sisters and their families, at the man who had given her hope, and at the newborn in her arms, Sarah May felt a peace she'd never known. They were not perfect in the way of fairy tales, but in the strength of their love and the family they had chosen and built. The story that began with 5 sisters sold like livestock had turned into something unrecognizably beautiful. A saga of love rising from injustice, of family forged in choice, and of wounds healed by the courage to believe in brighter days. Years later, when little James Patrick would crawl into his mother's lap and ask her how she and Papa had met, Sarah May would smile and say, "Once upon a time, in a dusty little town called Cedar Ridge, something wonderful was hiding behind something terrible. And that, my sweet boy, is how our family began." The ranch continued to flourish, growing with every passing season. More children came, daughters with Sarah May's green eyes and sons with Daniel's quiet strength. The house was expanded, but never lost its welcoming warmth. Sarah May held tight to the lessons she'd learned on that courthouse day, that dignity must be defended, that family could be chosen, and that sometimes it takes darkness to find the light. She and Daniel passed those truths to their children, teaching them the value of freedom and the responsibility that came with it. And on quiet evenings, when the children were asleep and the ranch was calm beneath the vast Texas sky, Sarah May would sometimes glance at her husband and remember the man who gave her his name without trying to own her. In those moments, she was reminded of just how much one single act of kindness could change everything. The old courthouse in Cedar Ridge still stood, though it never again saw such a disgraceful day. The town changed, laws changed, people changed, and the O'Brien family, without grand declarations, had helped shape a better future, not only for themselves, but for their entire community. As for the McKinnon sisters, each found her own kind of joy. Elizabeth became a respected rancher and outspoken advocate for women's rights. Mary Catherine and her husband opened a small hospital. Hannah bred some of the finest horses in Texas, while Rebecca ran a popular dress shop known for miles around. And Sarah May, once left behind, became the center of it all. The sister who not only survived being sold, but turned that pain into strength, into love, into legacy. She hadn't been saved by Daniel's offer of marriage alone. She had saved herself by having the courage to accept kindness, to trust love, and to turn a tragedy into the start of something enduring. In doing so, she had saved them all.